we're adopting something from the university world, which is having a respondent to each discussant. It's very much up to the respondent to kind of take things as they will, but hopefully that's going to be somebody who can help provide a little extra insight into the main presentations and then lead into audience discussion. Now I think I have to be fairly strict with the main presentations. I've warned 35 minutes and I'll be running a clock on that. But I'm actually very looking forward to, I haven't had Peter do a presentation of the details of the SETL initiative. But I'd like to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave you to introduce yourself more fully.
Thank you. I'm, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Peter Randall. Many years in financial services. And we're just going to do a little series of experiments here. So I think this is quite a nice way of starting off. So for the purposes of this, Professor Adams has become a central bank. Professor Adams is now going to issue something onto a chain. He's going to issue 100 euros onto a chain. We're just going to pass this around if we could. Just pass it around the room. It's great. Just pass it around. Pass it around. Oh, whoops. Thank you, Martin. Sorry. Okay.
I've broken the chain.
You broke the chain. About once every 10 years in financial services, something large comes along. About once a decade. So in the 70s, it was SWIFT. 1973, SWIFT formed. 1979 was the first US dollar transactions. In the 1980s, it was the establishment of CSDs, Central Securities Depositories. In the 1990s, by and large, it was the era, put it back onto the picture if you want. In the 1990s, it was RTGS, and it was, in 1990s, it was RTGS. In the year 2000, the biggest platform in the world had only just been formed, ICE. Only started in May 2000. Today, it's the biggest. The second biggest platform in the world, BATS Chi-X, or BATS, was founded in about 2003. So the 2000s, the noughties, if you will, were the application of 21st century technology to technology stacks that were actually still running COBOL on mainframes. This time around, in the teens, this decade, the big technology project is going to be blockchain. So that's the way we say, think about the history. I think that's very important to start with. Second point I'd like to make is, what does the city or any financial services centre really do? What does it really do? Many, many, many things, and it's quite easy to point with the program to all sorts of bad things out. But really what it does is it keeps very large lists of ledgers. There's a ledger for cash, there's a ledger for bonds, there's a ledger for derivatives, there's a ledger for FX, there's a ledger for property. All those ledgers are slightly different. They all really record an amount, a quantity, a name, a date, and all the rest of it. But what they really are at the end of the day is just a ledger. But they're all slightly different. They've grown up for different historical reasons, but there's an enormous amount of knitting. And it's the knitting which contains a number of things. First of all, it's very expensive to operate. Second of all, it's very complex to operate, which means that when it goes wrong, it becomes very, very difficult to find out exactly where things are. And what I mean by that is that you have to have all sorts of, complex resolution systems and complex sort of ways of sorting out problems. So that's very difficult. Has that now gone round? Excellent. If it could come back. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've just been a blockchain. You've just demonstrated a distributed ledger. You saw the asset moving around. Everybody knew where it was. That's how easy it is. It's not complicated. Now, if you take that as the view, I mean, obviously there's a bit more technology, there's a bit more clever things that go in there. But if you take that as the view, I hope, have they not connected my... let's see if this works. If you take that as the view, then I think you're going to be into reasonably good shape. And with a bit of luck, now, can we get the techie back?
Was your presentation wasn't loaded on there? You have it on.
No, I've got it on my thing here. Oh, is it coming up? Okay, all right. Okay, So can we see that? We can. Great. Good. So we take that as the view. We can start. Just start with something really simple. This is the simplified version of how equity settlements take place. So you've got some investors here. You've got a market which sets the price that the assets gets exchanged at. These big long lists and ledgers. The second thing the city does is also has mechanisms by which ownership structures can be changed. And one of those great ways of doing it is an exchange. And exchanges now, as a result of the ICE and all the rest of it, are now a lot more efficient. So you've got one set of activity going on here. Then it moves to a general clearing member, then it goes into clearing, CSDs, custodians, sub-custodians, investors, registrars. Wow! Registrars, they keep, have a look at CompuShare, keeps 100 million records, charges $10 per record per year before it moves anything. So it makes $1 billion a year for just keeping records. Ladies and gentlemen, you probably all know you can keep 100 million records today on a mobile phone. This whole thing, this knitting, if you will, costs, not my numbers, and these numbers are wrong, costs between $65 and $80 billion according to Oliver Wyman. Why are those numbers wrong? Well, they don't cover three really important things. The first thing they don't cover is liquidity charges. Has anybody ever read the LCH balance sheets or LCH report and accounts? They kind of brag about the amount of deposits that they have overnight. Where do those deposits come from? They come from the banks to fund the actual activities. So there's tens of billions of dollars just sitting effectively in overnight systems that are there. Of course, ostensibly to protect against risk. But in reality, that 65, 80 billion doesn't cover that. It doesn't cover the capital charges either against those liquidity players. And instead, it doesn't cover any of the messaging charges. So when you write for Swift, it'd be really interesting to put some charges in that Swift uses. Now, when you really have a good think about it, and I think it really is incumbent upon people in this space to think rather than just talk. When you have some really good thinking about this, you've got to realise that banks, in reality, only do three things. And they'd like to tell you they do a lot more, but it's really only three things. They make a single-sided payment. So I pay you. I'm a bank, I pay you. That's one thing they do, right? Second thing they do is a delivery versus payment. I pay you, you give me some security. Give me a bond or a stock or derivative or something. The third thing they do, quite important, is they do a payment versus payment. I give you some money, you give me some money. Now, PVP, for all intents and purposes, is a foreign exchange transaction. I give you some dollars, you give me some euros. I give you some yen, you give me some sterling. PVP, payment versus payment. DVP, delivery versus payment. SSP, single-sided payment. Solve, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, for P. In fact, rather more than 50% of every single financial market transaction is a payment. So that's a really critical place to start. And banks can only pay each other in a really special way. I'm sure you all know how that happens, but I'll explain just in case people don't. I can pay you, I can pay anybody in this room by actually getting some central bank money out and saying, look, here you go. Peer-to-peer central bank money exchange. It works really well. That's one way. I can pay you like that, but, HSBC can't pay Barclays like that. Another way I could pay you is by using faster payments. Another way I could go and get some cash out of the cash machine and I could pay you that way. I could write you a check. There are a whole series of ways in which I could pay you. But that's fine because you're perfectly prepared to accept from me into your bank a credit because it's on your bank. Now, what does it mean when it's on your bank? Well, it's effectively you have now got commercial bank money. So anybody that banks with HSBC, you're taking the risk that HSBC is not going to go belly up. That's what you're basically doing. But banks between each other can't take that risk. HSBC is never prepared to sort of say, if Barclays phones them up and say, we owe you £1 million. Oh, but don't worry, we've opened an account in your name and I'll send a checkbook around. HSBC will say, well, that's all very interesting, thank you very much, but you haven't paid me. because there's only one way that HSBC and Barclays can extinguish the interbank liability, and that way is to make a transfer across a specialist system called an RTGS system, real-time gross settlement service, which is which is operated by the central bank. And that is when you hear people make the distinction between central bank money and commercial bank money. Central bank money is the way in which banks can pay each other. And what that basically means is that when Barclays pays HSBC using an RTGS transfer, really straightforwardly, what happens is that £1 million is debited from the Barclays account and £1 million ends up in the HSBC account. Payment has then been made, and it accords with a bunch of things. The most important one is it achieves settlement finality. So if at that point Barclays goes bust, the liquidators can't get that money back because it's moved in central bank money. That's really, really important. Settlement finality as well. So, to be of generalised use to the financial services industry, you've got to take the view, I believe, that the place to start is in the ability to be able to move central bank money. Now that sounds like a really difficult thing to do, right? Go on and speak to Mark Carney and say, could we have some money, please, because we'd like to move it around between banks. Sounds really, really very difficult. But let's just bear with me for the argument, because I'll show you how I think this can happen. So let's say the first thing to do is to be able to move central bank money, i.e. to allow banks in one jurisdiction with one currency the ability to extinguish interbank liabilities with central bank money. Yeah, okay, that's fine. The next one, the really quite exciting one, because it's the biggest market in the world, the FX market, is the ability to have another central bank's money on there. So if you've got sterling on there, for example, and then you get some euros on there, you can now swap euros for sterling. I can give you central bank money, sterling. You can give me central bank money, euros. Effectively, we've effected a transfer of assets. If we can do that on a single ledger structure, things start to get very exciting. So when you've done single bank, single central bank, double central bank, then you can start to get into to other obligations. The first obligations, I think it's probably easier to get into, are fixed income securities, bonds. Corporations issue bonds all the time. They're very straightforward. They're not usually tied up in CSDs. They can be, but they're not always. And effectively, they're pretty easy to administer. So once they've been issued onto, they can be moved around very easily. Phase 4 is a bit more complicated, a little bit more complicated, because this is now in CSD land, and CSD land is basically equities and securities that have to go through a CSD. It does become a bit more complicated, but I can show you the answer. I'm not going to. I'll spend the rest of the afternoon describing the answer. Mindful of the 35 minutes I've got. And then phase 5 is, all the other stuff. So, question: how do you get money issued onto the system? On the left here, you've got the existing system. I don't know if you can see around there, Richard. On the left, you've got the existing system. So Bank A here, I would say it's Barclays, and Bank B here is, let's say, is HSBC. The way in which Barclays can pay HSBC is they send a SWIFT message, which goes to CHAPS. CHAPS then alters the balance at the settlement account at the Bank of England. The message comes back. Bank B now receives the message that it's got the £1 million, and Bank A receives the message it's just had its account debited for £1 million. That happens about 147,000 times a day, and that moves on average between 450 and 500 billion pounds a day. So that's really moving about a third of UK GDP on a daily basis moves through this system. An order of magnitude, some days it's less. It's open, you'll be pleased to know, it's open 5 days a week, and it runs at the moment for about 6 hours a day. So the rest of the time, when it's not open, banks just have to keep those liabilities on their books. But the regulators, they're clever, right? You keep the liability on the book, the bank says, well, you know, we're not sure that that bank might not go bust, so you've got to put some capital back. So you've got to keep putting capital into the system to protect against the fact that the Bank of England's central system isn't open. That gets quite expensive. Now, there are another set of ways in which RTGS balances can be changed. And up here, we call them DNS, delayed net settlement. So there's 4 of them. There are more, but you know, the diagram just gets messy if you add too many in. So you've got link, you've got faster payments, you've got backs, and you've got check and credit. Check and credit clearing, everybody knows that. It's very straightforward. Link, cash machines. You take 50 quid out of a HSBC machine you've got an account with RBS, they've got to settle that 50 quid between themselves. What they do, in fact, is net it all off, and they settle it once a day when the system's open. Backs, big old batch, COBOL, mainframe, clearing system that basically pays salaries and does direct credits and stuff like that. Faster payments is really interesting. It clears 3 times a day during the times that RTGS is open. The most important thing about it is that I can pay Martin now straight away, no problem at all. That's dead easy to do. My bank will be debited, his bank will be credited. Will his bank account will be credited? Mine will be debited effectively in real time. But actually, his bank doesn't settle with my bank doesn't settle with his bank, except 3 times a day. So think about it like this, if you will, just for a minute. If at 3:05 on the 24th of December, I sent Martin 100 quid. So, oh, please, you know, give this to my godson or something for his Christmas present. I sent him his £100. HSBC wouldn't actually make that payment to RBS. I banked with HSBC, you banked with RBS for the purposes. Wouldn't make that payment. They wouldn't make it on the 25th because it was closed. This year, 26th, 27th were Saturday and Sunday. The Monday was a holiday, 28th. It only happened on the 29th. They'd held the credit for 5 days. They hadn't settled. Well, okay, you know, my 100 quid's hardly going to break the bank. But, you know, you can think that the volume of payments going through faster payments is going through the roof. At some point, somebody will fail in that environment. It's inevitable. So that's how it works at the moment. Now, what happens if you're called Metro Bank? You're a challenger bank. Guess what? What happens if you're Metro Bank? You have to go to one of the CHAPS members, i.e. one of your direct competitors, and say, could you please alter the balances for me at the Bank of England? So the competitor banks are sort of like, you know, like a one-legged man at an arse-kicking competition. They're really stuffed because effectively they've got to give up an enormous amount of economic return to affect their daily flows of business. What happens if you're a customer down here? Well, they have to go to a correspondent bank which has to make the change. What happens if you're Goldman Sachs? Well, Goldman Sachs is not a member here, so they have to go to, in fact, they go to Barclays. Barclays make the change. They credit or debit the correspondent banking relationship of Morgan Stanley, and everything flows through. Charge, 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 charge. Great. Fantastic. All that costs, in the region at the moment, about £250 million a year. 200 million odd of real cost, and about 50 million of notional profit. That's what it costs the banks to operate. But when anybody in this room ever bought a house, you know what a CHAPS payment charge was out at. 25, 30 quid? Actually, the banks themselves pay about 12 pence to do that transfer. So that's the existing system. So we say it's perfectly possible to drop in here a blockchain. Before we drop in a blockchain, let's ask ourselves, how are we going to get money? How are we going to get the assets onto this blockchain? Well, there's a really simple way. Really, really easy. How do you think Barclays at the moment get the £1 million worth of tenors to put in their cash machines? Where does that actually come from? How does it occur? Well, it occurs in a really simple way, effectively. Slightly. There's a better story and there's a true story, but I'll tell the better story. So the better story is that Barclays phone up the Bank of England and say, can I have £1 million worth of tenors? Bank of England says, yeah, sure, there you go. Put them on a truck, send them round to Barclays. When that happens, when the truck leaves Threadneedle Street, Barclays' settlement account at the Bank of England is debited with, you got it, £1 million. They put it in their cash machine, because it's just like you or I going into the bank, taking out cash. It's an identical process. So they go in, the account is debited. Whizzes around the economy, it gets taken out of cash machines, gets paid into banks, etc., etc., etc. Let's say, ease of argument, that a big slug ends up over here in settlement bank. It doesn't matter how it gets there, but let's just say, Christmas, my mother got lots of new £10 notes out, gave them to my kids. That was fine. She took them out from HSBC. My kids took them out on Boxing Day, bought absolute trash, as they always do. Gets paid back into the bank. Well, where is it going to end up? Let's say, ease of argument, statistically sensible, it would be HSBC because it's the biggest bank. So HSBC's now got rather more banknotes than it wants. So what does it do with them? Well, bearing in mind there's a little promise on the front of the banknote, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £10. What that actually means, ladies and gentlemen, is that when they pay it back into the Bank of England, the Bank of England will credit their settlement account. So HSBC take the money in just the same way that anybody like us does, takes it straight back into the bank, says, here's £1 million. The Bank of England say, yeah, that's right, counted it, it's all there, fantastic, we'll credit your account. Really helpful, this banknote thing. So this RTGS system has two functions. On the one hand, if you like, on the one hand it maintains the clearing accounts for the 23 now, CHAPS members. Second function, it's an issue and redemption service for banknotes. That's really, really important, because when you come over here, you drop a blockchain in here, and Barclays now wants £1 million worth of blockchain money. It doesn't want £1 million of some Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency or some nonsense like that. It wants £1 million of real money, because that's the only thing it can extinguish interbank liabilities in the UK with. So it phones up the Bank of England and it says to them, can I have £1 million worth of blockchain money, please? Bank of England says, yeah, it's just the same as getting £1 million worth of tennis. So it can effectively, and this is language that I've heard from senior regulator. You mean we just have to squirt the money on? Yes, that's all you have to do. You squirt it onto the public-private keys associated with this particular bank. Now this thing operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It operates on a 5-second clock speed, so effectively you can extinguish liabilities between banks 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning. If a liability has occurred, you can extinguish it using a blockchain payment, because all you're basically doing is just asserting a transaction into the system and moving it around. So then, interestingly, what happens if eventually a whole load of money piles up over here? They've got too much of it. They've got too much electronic money. What do you do with it? Just the same way as you do with cash, ladies and gentlemen. You can take it back to the Bank of England and you can credit your settlement. So it's identical. The process is really easy and really simple. And that's why we think it's so exciting. Right, now, let's go and have a look at some of this working. Okay, right. So this here, ladies and gentlemen, is a working blockchain. I'll just make sure it's spinning up properly. It appears to be. It's the SETL working blockchain. And it's got 5 nodes, East Coast, West Coast, East Coast, London, Frankfurt, and Singapore. And we're flooding transactions onto this at the rate that CHAPS payments go through. So about 150,000 a day. All right? Those are Bank of England statistics. We've divided them out to make sure that the numbers are right. And we're flooding them on 10 minutes. Okay, I'll be real quick. So we're flooding them on about the same rate that CHAPS payments go on. They're flooded out of the London node, but they could be flooded out of anywhere. We deliberately set geographical limits on this so that we're showing real-world latencies. And these are real servers in real server farms that operate in these centers. These are the actual nodes. These represent the nodes, and this here you'll see which node is actually proposing the block at this time. It's taking us 5 seconds when it's working. It's taking us 5 seconds to write a block, and it's taking about 1.19 seconds to process. Let's just, sorry, this is just turn off these other guys for a minute. I didn't realise they were still on. There we go. So what do those transactions look like? That's exactly what they look like. It's a key from, a key to. It's a payment from, a payment to. That's now the ledger. It's dead easy. Just in the same way we passed the mobile phone round, this is all it's doing. It's moving something from, something to. Something from, something to. It's chaps, a couple of external references. There's a number of units that are moving through, and there's a time. The instrument is GB pounds, the issuer is Bank of England, and there's a unique movement ID. Right, now, that's interesting. Interesting, yeah. But it gets quite a bit better than that. Here's our CLS simulator. This is doing exactly the same thing, but it's now doing it with euros. It's now doing it with dollars. It's now doing it with yen. It's now doing it with Aussie dollars. So we're now moving in exactly the same ledger format, key from, key to. The protocol we're using is CLS, continuous link settlement, and we're actually moving, so the issuer of US dollars is the Federal Reserve. We've got a process exactly the same, in the same way that you get cash out of any RTGS system, you can use that to issue again. But that's it now working. So imagine you're now Jamie Dimon sitting in his big office, looking down the canyon of skyscrapers on 6th Avenue. What do you see when you look down that? You see one building that's full of clerks that just do single-sided payments. Next door, you see another building, still same bank, but they do FX payments. Next building is another huge building full of more clerks that just do securities markets transactions. The point being that once you've reduced it to a standard from to, you can get rid of all those people. You can close down all those offices. You can make huge savings in running your business. That will be very, very, very helpful to very difficult cash-strapped businesses. But effectively, there's something more here as well. What this really does, we contend, what this really does is do to payments and finance what containers do to shipping and world trade. It standardizes it. Imagine how much bigger imagine how much bigger finance could be, how much more efficient it could be if you had standardization. And this distributed ledger technology offers that capacity. But let's not stop there. Let's go and have a look. And I've got to be real fast now. Let's not just stop there. Let's have a look at some CREST payments, some CREST transactions. You won't be surprised. Identical structure, absolutely identical. So we've got some equities, we've got some bonds going through here, we've got some commercial bank money, we've got some central bank money. It's just moving in exactly the same way, from to, from to, from to. That's really important. Okay, now let's get into some sexy stuff. This here I'm going to show you is a state view. This is the ledger now. You'll now all become treasurers of BP. You sit in your office. Your board has told you you've got to pay a dividend. At the moment, it takes 6 to 8 weeks, and it costs a fortune to pay a dividend because there's an enormous amount of that knitting pattern that we went through at the beginning to sort out who the actual shareholders are. But this is now your new ledger. Every single shareholder can be represented down to a level of the legal entity identifier. In fact, we can go below that. Issuer, instrument. This is how we do identity, because in financial services, you've really got to be able to do identity. And what we mean by identity is who can you go to find out who this key is. In this particular case, you can go to these identifiers here called certex. Well, who are they? Well, they could be a central bank. You know what? They could be an accountancy firm. They could be an audit firm. They could be Swift. They could be a whole variety of different people. But they're people who could be trusted to keep the public-private keys, the public key identities, to keep those public keys to be able to provide to law enforcement or regulators or anybody else. So that's quite interesting. 5 minutes, right? I've got to go real fast now. Okay, so that's your ledger. Now let's do something really interesting. We talked about how long it was going to take to pay a dividend. So let's have a look at how do we pay a dividend. So you're the treasurer of BP. You're going to pay a dividend of £1. You're going to pay it in Bank of England sterling. You're actually BP, so let's just change that. That's fine. So you've set it all up. The board meeting has just finished and the chairman's just signed the minutes. You want to pay a dividend. Cost you £1. All right? Commit. This is really cheesy. Are you really sure you want to commit? Are you really sure you want to pay your dividends? Yeah. I'm the treasurer. Yeah, go on. It'd be reckless. Paid it. In a minute, also, did you see it flash red then? Yeah, you did. That was it paid. Every single shareholder got paid then. Now, I've got on here as well, I'm perfectly happy to show you, but I want to not go into it in great detail, but we've got a complete suite of what are called smart contracts. So we've got multi-asset clearing, we've got DVP, we've got PVP, we've got single asset clearing, we've got stop loans, we've got all the sorts of standard things that financial markets need and want. Anyway, that's all very interesting. Thank you very much. But there's more. So let's have a look now at the overall picture. This is great, Peter. You're doing 146,000 transactions a day. So what? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. This is effectively settling every delayed net settlement system transaction on a gross basis. This is 34 million transactions a day going through the UK system. That's exactly how many there are at the moment. Taking about 1.24 on a 5-second spread. So we've still got plenty of capacity. Moves very, very quickly. And you do that by some clever engineering, but you also do it by some thinking about what the actual structure is. So that's great. Now, before I get beaten up by the chairman, I'm just going to show you now something else. One of the questions that you might ask is, well, okay, this is great for the UK, Peter, but what about Singapore? Are they going to want to be on the UK chain? The answer is, of course, not. What about the euro? Are you going to put the euro on the same chain? The answer is, of course, not. No. You've got to have individual separated chains. And those chains have got to be able to have their own jurisdiction, their own shareholders, their own regulators, their own consensus algorithms. We're using a 51% algorithm here just for demonstration purposes, but you could set it, say you've got to have 51% plus the central bank. Possible? Yeah, perfectly possible. Etc., etc., etc. Probably in Singapore you'd need 100% plus the central bank. Anyway, I didn't say that. So here you've got, we're going to put everybody on. All right. So this is 15 chains speaking to each other, chain in, chain out, i.e. making transactions move between them. And what does that look like? 1.3 billion transactions a day. Globally, every electronic transaction that takes place is just over 1 billion at the moment. So it's 30% bigger, and that's only with 15 chains. Could you have n chains? Of course you could. So this is the power of what it means. And the things I hear from sort of people that talk about, we've got to do all these syndicated loan stuff, or you've got to do stuff down the ledger and all the rest of it. Forget it. Start with the hard stuff. Back in the day when I was at university, my tutor, Professor Lord Wedderburn, said to me, Peter, the reason I like you is because you'll always do the hard question. You'll always do the hard essay question. And you know what? Bizarrely enough, you always got more marks for that, because you could get it wrong, but if you did the hard question, you could always get more marks. So that was easy, because everybody else did the easy questions. This is a hard question, but it's not an insoluble one. We think we've got a good solution here. It's becoming, we're just about to close the funding round, and it's truly, truly exciting. The commercials behind this are unbelievable. Right, I'll say no more. I'm done.
Okay.
You happy?
Perfect timing. Yes, thank you.
There you go.